On a night when Boston felt carved from ice, a payphone in Kenmore Square blinked like a stranded lighthouse. Snow hissed against the glass. Inside the booth, a bundle breathed in tiny clouds, wrapped not in a baby blanket, but in a man's heavy wool coat that smelled faintly of tobacco and winter streets. A dime glinted in the tray beneath the receiver, as if the caller had left a single silver breadcrumb. When the paramedics arrived, summoned by a woman's voice that never gave a name, they peeled back the coat and found a newborn girl with a silver locket cinched around her wrist on a length of ribbon. 50 years later, she was called Nora. In the first newspaper clipping that her adoptive mother kept, the headline read, "Infant found in Kenmore phone booth during blizzard." The article was all distances and guesses, approximately 2 hours old. No identifying marks. Caller refused to stay on the line. But there was one indisputable detail: the locket. It had a tiny hinge and no key, the sort of trinket a child might dream over. Social workers logged it delicately, the way they logged the dime, the coat, the crumpled page of the Boston record inside the lining. Artifacts of a decision. Nora's beginnings traveled with her through a series of foster apartments that smelled of lemon cleaner and hard work, through a daycare in Dorchester, where she learned to nap through sirens, and finally to a narrow house in Cambridge with crooked floors and bookshelves that swallowed the walls. She arrived there at age 6, thin as a violin string, to meet Linda and Robert Thatcher, two overtired, open-hearted teachers who had already failed at having a child, and were stubborn enough not to fail a child who had already been failed. Linda taught her how to read with a finger under each line and a cup of cocoa sweating beside them. Robert taught her the trick of tying long hair into a knot that stayed put under a wool cap. They bought her practical boots and used bicycles. They pressed a kiss to her forehead every night and then, in a whisper just outside her door, asked each other if they were doing enough. "We'll do more tomorrow," Linda would promise. Tomorrow came, and came again. The locket lived in a small velvet pouch in Nora's top drawer, wrapped in tissue paper as if it could bruise. When she took it out, it was usually to feel the weight of it, to circle the seam with her thumb, to imagine a map inside, a name, a street, a reason. "Do you ever want to open it?" Linda asked once gently when Nora was 9 and had brought the pouch to the breakfast table. Nora shook her head. Not yet. She didn't know how to explain that the closed locket was a door that could still open to anything. Once opened, it could close to everything. Years passed in ordinary miracles. A science fair on the Charles River where a sudden gust sent poster boards cartwheeling. A 6th grade orchestra concert in a school auditorium with a radiator that coughed like an old man. Nora at 12, cheeks pink from the cold, telling Robert, "I want to keep our last name." Nora at 14, hearing a payphone ring outside the Porter Square tea station and flinching for reasons she couldn't admit to friends. She avoided payphones the way some people avoided certain street corners, certain songs. Linda kept a framed photo on the mantel. Toddler Nora in a red coat, snowflakes dissolving on her eyelashes, a shy smile that made people want to hand her mittens that fit. "You were chosen," Linda would say, and Nora believed her, even on the days she wondered why someone else had chosen to leave. At 20, Nora kept busy enough to dodge the ache, college classes by day, cafe shifts by night, where the espresso machine shook like a mini earthquake. At 30, she married briefly and amicably, two good people with different calendars. At 40, she ran a small design studio out of a brick building in Somerville with plants in the windows and clients who insisted on calling her a lifesaver. Over the years, the locket traveled from the top drawer to a small jewelry dish on her dresser. She still hadn't opened it. She didn't know how to ask her parents to forgive her for wanting what was inside. Then came the winter she turned 50, the winter Boston felt familiar and newly sharp all at once. Robert's hands, once decisive with knots and picture hooks, trembled. The diagnosis arrived with the matter-of-fact cruelty of a parking ticket under the wiper. Late stage. In early January, he was gone. After the funeral, Nora returned to the Cambridge house, which had learned a quieter kind of breathing. She boxed sweaters, labeled cords, folded t-shirts still warm from the dryer. The locket, which had always been heavy, started to feel like a bell trying to be rung. In the bottom of a cardboard box marked MISC, she found the velvet pouch, and beneath it, a small envelope with her name in Linda's tidy handwriting. Inside, the original clipping and a note she'd never seen. "If you ever decide to open the locket," it read, "know that we'll love you just the same before and after." That night, snow began to fall. Soft, relentless, a memory reenacted. Nora sat on the edge of her bed with the locket in her palm in the house listening. "I'm ready," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant ready to grieve, ready to risk certainty, or simply ready to stop running from a circle of silver smaller than a thumbprint. She turned the hinge toward the light, searching for the seam, heart hammering a rhythm that felt older than she was. But then something unexpected happened. The hinge refused her. The seam would not yield to fingernails or the edge of a dull butter knife wrapped in a dish towel. After a long minute that felt like an hour, Nora exhaled and set the locket back in the velvet pouch as if it were a sleeping animal. The house settled. The snow threaded the windows with quiet. She could almost hear Robert's voice. "Try the right tool for the job, kiddo." So she put on her boots, pocketed the pouch, and stepped into the night. By morning, the sidewalks in Cambridge were a mosaic of salt and footprints. Nora rode the Red Line to Park Street, transferred to the Green, and surfaced at Haymarket where the air smelled like oranges and wet cardboard. She walked toward the North End, past bakeries stacking cannoli like small miracles and old men arguing softly about soccer. On Salem Street, she found a narrow shop with a window full of pocket watches and the kind of sign that had been hand-painted before she was born. DeLuca Watch and Clock Repair. The bell over the door made a tired sound. Behind the counter, an older man with silver hair and careful hands looked up from a loupe. "What story do you want time to tell you today?" he asked, half routine, half ritual. Nora placed the pouch on the glass and let the locket slide into his palm. "It's been closed for 50 years, she said. "I think it's time." He smiled, not unkindly. "Half my customers come in for batteries. The other half come in for courage." He turned the locket under the desk lamp. Good hinge, delicate tension. Whoever locked this meant it to stay that way unless someone asked nicely. He lifted a tray of watchmaker's tools, selected something that looked like a slender guitar pick, and worked in silence. "You know," he murmured, "there's always a moment before the click. People imagine the click is the miracle. It's not. It's the breath before. Are you ready?" She nodded, throat tight. The click was almost comically soft. DeLuca opened the locket with 2 fingers and set it on a square of felt. Inside, nestled like a secret, was a thin scrap of paper folded twice. He reached for tweezers, then stopped, reading her face. "You should," he said, and stepped back. Nora's hand shook. She unfolded the paper. The ink had bled a little with age, splaying each letter at the edges like frost blooming on glass. But the word was clear enough to slice. Elena. The name hit her with 2 lives at once, the one she had lived, and the one that had been waiting all along. Was it her name before Nora? A mother's name? A promise? The paper trembled between her fingers. On the reverse, in smaller script, "Forgive me." She didn't realize she was crying until DeLuca wordlessly slid a clean handkerchief across the counter. "Names are doors," he said. "Sometimes they open to rooms, sometimes to hallways." "What if this is a hallway to nowhere?" she asked, hating the fear in her voice. He shrugged the wise shrug of a man who had watched hours fail and be mended. "Then it's still a hallway you've walked, which is more than standing in the foyer." She paid him too much. He didn't argue. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sidewalks were wet and shining. The world had again decided to go on. Nora ducked into a cafe on Hanover to warm her hands around a paper cup and to read the scrap again. "Elena. Forgive me." She tried the name in her head, then softly under her breath like a password. "Elena." The vowels felt like a door she hadn't known was in the room. On impulse, she detoured to the Boston Public Library at Copley. Under a ceiling painted to resemble a sky that never stormed, she requested the old intake file from the Department of Social Services. Records that had been digitized, then half forgotten behind logins and bureaucracy. The librarian, kind and brisk, helped her navigate. "We'll see what we can find," the woman said, tapping keys with the confidence of someone who has made peace with systems. After a few minutes, a green progress bar conceded a handful of PDFs and one low-resolution scan of a run report from the ambulance crew on the night she was found. Nora clicked. There it was, 12:18 a.m., female infant approximately hours old. Found in telephone booth Kenmore Square. Caller female, no name given. Infant wrapped in men's wool coat, dime and newspaper present. At the bottom, barely legible, an addendum in someone's tired handwriting. Bracelet, locket on wrist. Contents unknown. She stared at the screen until the text swam. Her heart had expected the general shape of these facts, but facts written down have a different gravity. They pull you. She printed the page, the printer's grinding cough sounding like an old memory waking up. Back at the desk, the librarian leaned over. "If this is personal," she said gently, "you might look at microfilm of the local papers. Sometimes reporters mention details social workers didn't. Also, we keep an index of community radio bulletins. In the 70s, stations took out ads for reunions, missing relatives. Not official, but human. Microfilm. Community radio. Human." The words arranged themselves into a path. Nora thanked her, pocketed the printout, and felt the old house of her life tilt a few degrees toward some new horizon. Had someone named Elena been searching for her? Or had someone asked Elena to forgive them? If you were Nora, would you think Elena was you? Or the person who left you? On the way home, she walked past a decommissioned payphone bolted to a brick wall, its receiver long gone, its coin slot an empty mouth. She reached out and touched the metal anyway, as if the past might still be warm. That night, she placed the scrap of paper inside the locket again, as if returning a bird to its nest. She set the locket on her nightstand, the run report beneath it, and Googled Boston 1975 radio family reunions. A rabbit hole appeared, inviting and dark. The first link mentioned a late-night segment where callers read pleas into the static. If anyone knows. The second was a digitized schedule from WBZ listing a volunteer line active after midnight on weekends. She scrolled, pulse climbing. A third link led to a small archive site with a list of surviving tapes, and next to February 1976, a description that made her breath stop. Anonymous female caller, accented English, message for Elena. Audio degraded. She clicked, and the page asked for a small donation to access the files. She paid without thinking and pressed play. But then something unexpected happened as the tape began to crackle, and a voice, thin with distance, said a name that wasn't Elena at all. The audio opened like a door into a cold room, thin, hissy, as if the years themselves were wind. A woman's voice trembled through static, the vowels rounded by an accent that braided Portuguese into English. Meu Deus, if you are listening. Marina, forgive me. The name landed in Nora's chest like a stone in water. Not Elena. Marina. The woman inhaled audibly close to the microphone. They told me to forget. I cannot. Tell Elena. Tell her I kept the other piece. Tell her about the coat. Tell her I called. The tape clicked, stuttered, resumed with a sob that seemed to snag on the machine's gears, then ended in dead air. Nora sat very still. The cafe's evening customers drifted around her carrying paper cups and ordinary conversations. Her screen reflected her face back to her, eyes too bright, jaw set. Marina, Elena, two names in one breath like syllables of the same broken word. Was the caller the mother? The sister? If you heard your life hinge on a stranger's voice, would you believe her? The archive listed a contact. For permissions, email Ruth Albright, former WBZ producer. Nora typed before she could think better of it. She told Ruth the date on the tape, the names she'd heard, the coat, the locket, the payphone. She pressed send and felt foolish for believing the world might answer. Ruth replied within the hour. Meet me at the station tomorrow. I saved more than I should have. The WBZ building still smelled like coffee and dusted carpet. Ruth was in her 70s, brisk and small with a haircut that said she had learned how to hurry a long time ago. Back then, she said, leading Nora past framed gold records, we thought late-night radio could fix anything. It couldn't. But sometimes it left breadcrumbs. She unlocked a storage room and revealed a row of banker's boxes labeled in a hand that could have been a teacher's: 1975, winter, 1976, spring, calls, anon. They sat on the floor with their knees almost touching like conspirators. Ruth produced a ledger and a carton of cassettes. We wrote down caller details when we could catch them. First name, accent, anything distinguishing. She flipped to a page that had been thinned by fingers. Here, February 1976. Female. Sounds Portuguese? Note says, baby, 2 names, coat, Kenmore. Nora swallowed. 2 names? Ruth peered over her glasses. You sure you want to go deeper? It doesn't always make you feel better. No, Nora said honestly. But it makes me feel awake. They listened to 2 more tapes, both different women asking for people who would never hear them. The third was the one Nora had streamed, only cleaner. The voice was closer now, the ache inside it crisp. Marina, forgive me. Tell Elena I kept the other piece. The nurse was kind. The snow. I called from the phone with glass. Static swallowed the last words. The nurse, Nora repeated. Was there a name? Ruth thought, eyes narrowed as if reading something far away. We had a volunteer who sometimes noted hospitals. Mass General Beth Israel. Wait. She rummaged in a manila folder and lifted a slip of paper so fragile it looked like it might dissolve if breathed on. Here. MGH, Night of Storm. Nurse with Irish last name. She smiled ruefully. Half of Boston, then. Nora laughed in spite of the tension. Do the tapes ever include a return number? Ruth's smile tilted. Honey, the whole point was anonymity. But I did keep a list of staff who took those calls. One of them, Maeve, married a doctor at Mass General. If she's still around, she might remember who on nights had the softest hands. She scribbled a name and a phone number on the back of a station business card. Call. Say Ruth sent you. The hospital corridors had changed their paint colors since the 70s, but they had not learned a less fluorescent light. Maeve O'Rourke, retired now, met Nora in a cafeteria that smelled like soup and sanitizer. She was the kind of woman whose presence steadied a room even if you just met her. Ruth warned me, she said, pouring tea. Tell me what you know. Nora told the story cleanly, the way you tell someone where it hurts. Payphone, coat, dime, Locket, the name. The tape. Marina. Maeve listened like a nurse, attending, not interrupting, building a mental chart. There was a night, she said at last, voice grown quiet. A storm so bad we ferried staff to work by police cruiser. A teenager came in with her aunt, Portuguese. She'd labored too long at home because her father, God forgive him, refused her a hospital. Fear can be a kind of neglect. Maeve's eyes flicked up. She kept saying a name between contractions. Elena. The aunt shushed her every time as if names could shame you. Nora's breath dimmed. Elena was the girl? The girl, Maeve repeated carefully, was small but fierce. The young mother was a child herself, really, terrified in 2 languages. When the baby came, there was confusion. The aunt and the mother argued in whispers I wasn't meant to understand. They had a men's coat with them. I remember because it smelled like cigarettes and rain. We wrapped the baby in it when the linens ran out. The aunt kept asking me if anyone would blame the mother if the baby went somewhere safe. Maeve's mouth tightened. I told her safety has nothing to do with blame. Nora gripped her paper cup until it rustled. Did you get her name? Maeve shook her head. We wrote Jane Doe more times than I care to remember. But I remember this. The aunt said, we already have Marina. We cannot have 2. I thought she meant a cousin, a neighbor child. Anything but what she meant. The mother cried and whispered Elena like a prayer. Later I heard someone call from the lobby phone, a woman. She said, please go now. The one in the glass booth. I called it in myself. 2 names in a single family. One kept, one carried away. Nora felt the floor tilt again under her chair. Marina, she repeated. Elena. Maeve reached across the table and put her hand over Nora's, a touch measured to not break anything. There were 2, she said softly. Whatever happened next, it began with 2. Nora walked out onto Cambridge Street and the sky looked lower than it had an hour before. The sidewalk traffic stirred around her. Nurses changing shifts, interns walking fast as if footsteps could erase doubt. She stood in that moving stream and let the revelation sink its hooks. The Locket's name was not a mother's plea alone. It was a map with two destinations. Somewhere near, a payphone shell still clung to a wall. For a foolish heartbeat, Nora wanted to lift a receiver that wasn't there and ask the past for a forwarding number. If you were Nora, would you look for Marina first? Or would you search for the woman whose voice had crossed decades to ask forgiveness? She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Ruth's card and then over the hospital's main line, and then over a blank search bar where Marina, Providence, typed itself in her head. Snow began again, almost politely. She started to walk, not yet knowing where. And that was when her phone buzzed with an unknown Rhode Island number. The Rhode Island number belonged to a man who introduced himself as Leo Rodriguez. Voice warm and quick, like someone used to bridging gaps for other people. "Ruth told me your name," he said. "I used to volunteer on those reunion lines. I kept a notebook, you know. Bad habit. You mentioned Elena and Marina. I think you should come to Providence." By late afternoon, Nora was stepping out onto Atwell's Avenue, Federal Hills Arch casting its iron curve over the street. The air smelled of garlic and rain and, faintly, the sugar and yeast perfume that followed Portuguese bakeries everywhere. Leo waited at a cafe with tiny tables and strong coffee, a battered notebook already open between them. He had the calm of someone who had listened to a lot of strangers cry. "I remembered because of the coat," he said, tapping a page where his tight handwriting marched in rows. "We took calls from all over. But there was a woman who called more than once, winter of '76. She said her niece had a baby in a storm, 2 names. She said she kept the other piece." That phrase stuck like a burr. "The other piece," Nora repeated, thinking of the Locket halves that existed only as a metaphor. Until they didn't. Leo slid a photocopy across the table. It was an old classified from O Journal, the Portuguese language weekly that braided the communities of Fall River, New Bedford, Providence, Somerville, Procuracy Familia, Marina, Elena, Favor Ligar. He tapped another page. And this, a baptism record from St. Anthony's in 1973. A Marina baptized here, parents from St. Michael in the Azores. The surname was Rocha. Nora tasted the name. "Rocha." Leo nodded. "There's a woman on Federal Hill who runs a small alteration shop, Marina Rocha. She's 49. Wears a silver locket. I asked her delicately if the name Elena meant anything. She said no. But I think that wasn't the whole answer." They crossed to a storefront with a hand-painted sign. Marina's Alterations. Inside, spools of thread arranged by shade made a gentle rainbow against the wall. A woman looked up from a sewing machine, her hair pinned back in a way that made her seem both practical and vulnerable. Her eyes, dark, steady, met Nora's, and in the fraction of a second before anyone spoke, a kind of recognition moved between them like a tide under the surface. The same angle to the cheekbones, the same small comma of a scar at the jawline, as if punctuation ran in blood. Leo cleared his throat. "Marina, this is Nora." Marina stood. When she spoke, her English held the music of someone who had grown up between radio stations. "Ruth's friend said you might come." Her gaze dropped, and there it was, a silver locket at her throat, the twin to the weight in Nora's pocket. "I was told my sister died the winter I was born," she said calmly, as if she had practiced making the sentence sound like weather. "And I was told not to ask more." Nora placed her locket on the counter, then, after a breath, opened it to show the scrap. "Elena, forgive me." Marina's fingers fluttered, then steadied. She unclasped her own locket. Inside, the paper was browned with years and written in Portuguese, the ink thin. "Perdoa-me. My." They sat, the 3 of them, at the back table near the zipper jars, watching the 2 lockets side by side, one with English, one with Portuguese, one ribbon frayed, one chain rewired with care. "My tia Lydia raised me in Providence," Marina said, eyes on the past. "She worked in a bakery on Broadway. I wore hand-me-downs from cousins and learned to hem before I learned to spell Wednesday. And she used to say, 'God takes one thing, but he gives another.' When I asked what he took, she would stir the soup louder. Did she ever say our mother's name? Nora asked. Saying our mother made the room tilt and then settle, like a boat adjusting to a new weight. Marina hesitated. Once when she was very tired, she said Anna, but she wouldn't say more. When I turned 18, I asked for papers. She gave me a shoebox with baptism cards and an unsent letter. I kept it in a tin with buttons. I haven't opened it since. May I see it? Nora asked, voice smaller than she meant it to be. Marina disappeared into the back room and returned with a biscuit tin that, improbably, still smelled faintly of butter. Inside were buttons sorted by color, and beneath them a letter folded so many times it was almost lace at the edges. Marina handed it to Nora as if handing a match. You read, she said softly. Your English is better for the hard parts. Nora unfolded the letter. The paper trembled between her hands. The handwriting was careful, as if each word had been scrubbed clean before being written down. Marina minha filha, she read aloud, translating as she went for the room and for herself. If you ever see this, it means I found courage I did not have when I was a girl. I named your sister Elena. They told me I must choose. I chose to call from the phone with Glass. I go to Fall River because there is work, and because the aunt thinks distance makes forgetting easier. Distance makes a different kind of remembering. If God is kind, you will forgive me. If God is kinder, you will both forgive me together. Marina pressed a hand to her mouth. Leo stared at the floor, giving them the dignity of not staring at their grief. Fall River, Nora said, the words sounding like coordinates and absolution. She went to Fall River. Marina nodded, blinking hard. There is a bakery there, she said. My tia used to get massa cevada for Easter from a woman named Ana Rocha, who had scars on her hands from the oven. When I was little, I thought all mothers had hands like that. They stood at the counter again, two lockets open like windows. Outside, the late light turned the street to tin. If you were us, Marina said, a small, wry smile finding its way to her mouth, would you go tonight or wait for daylight? Nora laughed, the sound breaking and then mending. Tonight, she said. If we wait, we imagine. And I'm tired of living in the imagined. Leo scribbled an address on a receipt. South Main Street, he said. You'll know it by the smell of sugar and the line out the door on Saturdays. If you need me, call. Sometimes it helps to have a witness. They drove south with the radio low, the highway streaming out in front of them like film unspooling. They didn't talk much. There were too many words and not enough sentences. In Fall River, the streets climbed and dipped like the backs of tired horses. The bakery's sign was modest, more functional than charming, Rocha's. Through the window, a woman with silver-streaked hair moved behind the counter. Box string looped around her thumb in the old-fashioned way. Marina parked. The engine ticked as it cooled. Nora felt her pulse in her fingers, in her throat, in her ears. 2 lockets, 2 names, 2 women holding a handle. Neither had ever had the chance to turn. They reached for the door at the same time, sisters reflected, and the bell above it began to lift as if gathering breath. The bell gave a small domestic ring, the kind that usually announces people craving sugar and warmth. Inside, the bakery was fragrant with cinnamon and yeast. A glass case held rows of malasadas and coijadas stacked like small golden moons. The woman behind the counter looked up, string looped around her wrist, her hands marked with pale oven scars that told a whole biography without a word. Her face softened into welcome, then stilled as if something in her recognized something in them before her mind caught up. We close in 10 minutes, she began, habit more than refusal. Marina spoke first, steady but breathless. Ana Rocha? 1,000 summers and winters seemed to pass across the woman's face in one heartbeat. She nodded once. Sim, she said, and then, as if translating her own life, yes. Nora stepped forward. We brought something. She reached into her coat pocket and set her locket on the counter, open, the old paper like a leaf. Elena, forgive me. Marina unclasped hers and set it beside the first. Perdoa-me. Mine. Anna's hands rose, then hovered, torn between touching and not daring. The string went slack around her wrist and the bakery box folded in on itself. Meu Deus, she whispered, her eyes filling without theatrics. I wrote both, and I never had the courage to see if the words found a house. The door clicked as Leo slipped inside and quietly turned the sign to closed. He stood near the pastries like a sentry who knows the point is to keep watch, not to interfere. Anna led them to a small table in the back, kettle already humming in a way that suggested she had always been braced for this day. They sat with tea that went cold, and then warm again. The story came out in small, careful portions, like a cake cut for a child. I was 17, Anna said, voice level, a witness under oath. My father's coat was the one we brought to the hospital. He said I had shamed him. He said, one child is already a cross. Your cousin Marina, who lived with us. He told me my punishment would be to remember. My sister Lydia believed what he believed about survival. She took you. She looked at Nora, then away, unable to hold the gaze and the memory at once, because she said she could live with being hated more than she could live with losing the family. She stopped. The kettle clicked off. I slid the dime into her palm. I begged her to let me call. I called, and then Maeve the nurse called again because I was shaking too much and she wanted the ambulance to move faster than shame. Nora swallowed. The payphone. The coat. She couldn't help herself. Was it your father's? Anna nodded. A navy peacoat. Heavy. It smelled like him. I thought, foolish thought, that the smell might mean you would always be warm. Marina reached across the table and set her hand on Anna's arm, not forgiving, not accusing, anchoring. Tia Lydia raised me. She told me my sister died. Her voice didn't break. It forged. Why? Cowardice and a lie make a rope that pulls tight, Anna said. When I came to Fall River for work, Lydia followed with you, and then she could not let go of the story that justified what she did. I should have come back. I should have set fire to that story. I made bread and told myself bread was enough. It was not. Silence folded around them, soft as flour. The clock over the register ticked, a practical sound that had endured wars and weddings. Nora held the scrap of paper with Elena printed on it as if feeling the pulse of a person. Did you name me? She asked quietly. I named both of you, Anna said, tears catching on the old burn lines. Elena for my grandmother who had hands like birds and could skin a fish in 3 motions. Marina because the sea keeps secrets and returns what it takes when it can. Who put me in the booth? Nora asked, the question that had sat for 50 years waiting to be voiced. Anna did not hide. Lydia. She was sure hard choices must be harsh to count. I followed behind with the dime. She said, don't call. It will make it worse. I called anyway. She looked at both of them as if finally letting the light fall on the thing she'd hidden. I have been calling ever since. In my head. In my sleep. In prayers that were half Portuguese, half bargain. Nora leaned back, the chair wood pressing against the years she had spent bracing. She wasn't sure what forgiveness should feel like. Fireworks, absolution, a just-so chord resolving. What she felt was smaller and more durable, a loosening. I can't give you back what we lost, she said, voice steady. Neither can you. But we can decide what the next part is called. Marina's laugh came out wet. Maybe we call it, 2 sisters walk into a bakery and come out with too much bread. Anna's smile appeared strange at first on a face shaped by penance, then right. Take massa sovada, she said, rising, grateful for the ritual of needing and giving. Take quejadas. Take more than you need. That is how we undo scarcity. As they boxed pastries, small payoffs rose like warm dough. Anna fetched a tin of old photographs from beneath the counter. A girl with dark braids at the docks in Ponta Delgada, a Boston winter where the snow piled higher than the Volkswagen, a snapshot of a young mother in a thrift store coat holding a baby wrapped in a navy peacoat that swallowed her whole. You were fierce, Anna said, touching the baby's eyebrows in the picture. You were loud. Lydia said loud girls needed to learn quiet. I say loud girls need a choir. They ate still warm malasadas at the tiny table, sugar dusting the edges of grief. Plans unspooled not as a single epic vow but as a grocery list that could be kept. Sunday dinners alternating between Cambridge and Fall River. A visit to St. Anthony's to read the names in the old books with eyes that would finally recognize them. A letter to Maeve, with a photograph tucked inside. A stop at the cemetery where Robert lay, to say thank you for every knot, every picture hook, every late-night cocoa that had delivered Nora safely to this door. When the hour grew late, Anna held both their faces for a moment in her palms, as if measuring and blessing. "If you will let me," she said to Nora, "you will always be Elena and Nora both to me. A name for the root and a name for the tree." Nora nodded. "I like trees," she said, with a small smile that felt like a birth. They turn light into sugar. Outside, Fall River had become a hush of sleeping streets and the river a dark ribbon catching city glow. They stood at the curb with a box heavy in their hands and a lighter weight on their chests. "There's one more thing," Marina said, fishing in her purse. She handed Nora a tiny screwdriver from her sewing kit. "In case you ever want to change how the lockets close. We can make them easier to open. We can make them open for each other." Nora laughed, unexpected and bright. "Let's keep the click," she said, "but let's keep the key between us." Back in the car, they didn't turn on the radio. The road hummed. The world had not transformed. The city still needed salt. The rent check still expected the first of the month. Morning would still come too early. But something crucial had shifted. A door with no handle on the outside had opened from within. If you were in Nora's shoes, would you have opened the locket sooner? Or did it open at exactly the right time? What part of your past would you forgive to make room for who you are now? Thank you for staying through Nora's journey. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that truth, even when it hurts, can set a table big enough for everyone.